Yes, now they both work. When we last left off at the end of part 2, oh, this is part 3. At the end of part 2, I was getting ready to go through and measure all the resistors on the first unit I was working on. This is the model 2016 from 1961. I went through and I measured all the resistors. All but one were within specifications, which is outstanding. So that one single one was replaced. At that point, enough work had been done on it to reinstall the vacuum tubes. 2 of them were bad and they were replaced with new tubes. The other ones were fine. And I went ahead and for the very first time turned it on and it actually played. It didn't play perfectly, but it played nevertheless. With a little bit of work on aligning the tuner somewhat, the reception is very, very good. In fact, if we turn it up.
My word this hour is plate, as in you got a lot on your plate.
It plays very nicely, both AM and FM. This is the unit that had the broken dial glass here, which is a little hard for you to see. And this is the broken glass. This was sent in with the units in a little package. It had been broken in half and one of the ends is broken off and one piece is missing. What I did to make the repair of these 2 units easier is I sourced out a third unit. This is the remains of it. No faceplate, parts robbed off the back of the unit, and this was purchased strictly as a parts unit. And it was purchased as a part unit for 3 specific parts, and then turns out a few extra parts which came in handy. And we'll get to those as we go along. So the dial glass was one of those parts, and that went into this unit. I also cleaned all the knobs, got all the grunge out of the grooves. And what I like to do with these is after you very carefully scrape all the 60 years of grunge out of the grooves in the knobs, I wrap them up in a cloth and I spray them with this. This is Poor Boy's World Natural Look leather, vinyl, rubber, plastic, tires, and more. It's sort of like the industrial strength Armor All, and it's kind of a gloppy blue stuff inside the can. And if you spray the knobs with this and wrap them up in a cloth and leave them for 2 or 3 days, it will darken up the black plastic of the knobs and give them a little bit of shine, which makes them look very nice and a lot closer to new than the sort of old faded out black plastic that they were when I started. After I got this one to the point that it would play, and I was reasonably confident that it was close to being finished, at least I thought it was, I decided to go on to this one. This is the other 2016 from 1958, and I followed the same exact repair path. I replaced the multi-section can capacitor as I did in the first one. I went through and replaced all of the film capacitors and the one electrolytic. These are the parts from, these are the parts from the second one. As I mentioned in, I think, part 1, these are 2 very different units because this is 1958 and this is 1961, and they do have variations in how they were assembled and the components that are in them. Very similar, but not exactly the same. After getting that done, I went through, measured all the resistors. What I found in this one was interesting because there was one resistor that was actually burnt in half. So obviously it was shorted to the chassis. In sort of searching out through the circuitry, what I found was that there was one ceramic disc capacitor, this little guy. This was attached to one lead of the resistor and the other lead went to ground. This had shorted out internally, so the resistor essentially was connected directly to ground. I did replace the resistor just to see what I would get, and when I applied power, it almost instantly began to smoke, which was bad, and that was done as a clue to try to figure out where the problem lied and why it burnt up in the first place. After finding that the disc capacitor was shorted out, I replaced that with a modern equivalent, which are these, and then hooked it all back up. I still didn't have any power on that part of the circuit. So then I started searching backwards a little bit to see why that was the case, and what I found was this. This is a 250 ohm 5 watt ceramic capacitor. If you look here carefully on the back side of it, you can see the burn marks. This had been overloaded and essentially burnt out. And this was part of the circuit that supplied the power to the 100 ohm resistor that was connected to the disk capacitor that was connected to ground. So this was replaced also, and it was replaced with a more modern, up-to-date resistor like these. These were actually, there's one in each set, and they actually were both replaced because of the way that circuit is designed. The 5 watt resistor is sort of a brute force design of dropping voltage on that line. That means those resistors tend to run hot, and since I already bought them and I was already working on them, we went ahead and replaced both of them. Once I did that, I put all the tubes back in. I did put new light bulbs in each of the units, so the dial lights are new and they light up properly now. Once I did that, I put the tubes back in. This one required 5 tubes replaced, 4 of them because they were bad, 1 of them because it was the wrong tube. Somebody had replaced a tube at one point and probably used what they could find instead of what they actually should have chosen, and so that was replaced. The one that was wrong, it wasn't bad, it was just wrong. When I powered it up the first time, the FM radio played great. The AM radio didn't play at all. And it's like, oh no, now what? It wasn't even that there was like static on the AM band, and as you tuned it, the static would vary somewhat, and those sort of little helpful signs that you get sometimes. This was like no sound, no signal, nothing whatsoever. And that's always really kind of a hard place to start from, because then it comes down to where do you start looking? After poking around a little bit one day and then running out of time, I put all of this aside for 2 or 3 days, because sometimes what I like to do is sort of think about things for a while before I go back to them. You know, you can sit there for hours and hours and hours trying to troubleshoot something sometimes and not get anywhere at all. And the way I seem to work best is I'll put it aside, I'll wait 2 or 3 days and then go back to it, because it sort of rolls around in my head a little bit. And when I go back to it, usually, hopefully, I've got a genius idea in figuring out where the problem is. So what I decided to do, which is an advantage if you have more than one set or spare units like we have, I started to compare this one where the AM played to this one where it didn't, and started at the beginning of the AM circuit, which are the terminals where the antenna is connected, and started measuring forward in the circuitry looking for where a problem may lie. And what I found was this. This is one of the AM tuning coils. It's the second coil in the chain of coils, and this little coil is actually bad. That's why there was no static at all, because whatever signal was coming in through the antenna wasn't making it past this. It was making it through the first coil, and then it would hit this, and this is bad, and it doesn't go any further. So fortunately, we had our parts unit over there, and I was able to rob this coil out of that unit and put it in this unit. And once I did that, then when I turned it back on, the AM had not only static, but you could somewhat get some stations. Now, when you swap out coils, inside here is an adjustment. It's a little ferrite slug, and in this case it's got a threaded rod on the end of it, and you have to take this and you have to tune it. You have to align the tuner to make it work right. So with a little bit of rudimentary fiddling around, this is not setting the whole thing up to do a full-on alignment. This is just enough to get it, to bring it back to life, to see where we really are with it. I was able to get some AM reception, which was very good. Once I got some AM reception, then I set it up to do part of an alignment on just the AM, which is fairly straightforward to do. And what I found was a problem with this. This is the first RF coil. This is the coil that you adjust right after the signal comes in from the antenna. And again, inside here is supposed to be a ferrite core, and you have to use the proper type of plastic tool, and as you do the alignment, you rotate the ferrite core. It's threaded, so it moves back and forth inside the cardboard tube in between these two coils, and that's how you make the alignment. What I found was someone had made a very rookie and common mistake, which was instead of using the proper plastic tool to try to do the adjustment, they used a metal like hex tool or an Allen wrench, and they broke the ferrite core. These are some of the remnants of the core. I'm not sure what happened to the big piece. It's around the workbench somewhere. You can't use a hex tool inside a ferrite core for two reasons. Ferrite is very brittle. Think of it like a piece of pencil lead. It's a very, very brittle material, and the metal tool will, as you turn this trying to adjust it, it will stress the ferrite and it will crack it. And if you crack it, you change the mass of the core and then you can't align it correctly. The other problem is ferrite is used because it has properties that allow it to work inside a magnetic field, which is basically what you have inside a coil like this. And if you put a metal tool inside the center of the core, you're changing the mass of the core by adding the metal of the tool, and then your alignment doesn't work because you might get it aligned with the tool in place, but as soon as you take the tool out, then your alignment is way off. So you can't do it that way. What I tried to do at first was rob a ferrite core out of another one of these and simply thread it into this one. That would have been easy, of course, but that didn't work out because I think the inside of the tube is damaged and I couldn't get it to thread in properly and I didn't want to break it. So again, our parts unit over there gave up its coil for this unit. Once I put that in, then I was able to do an alignment on it, and then the AM radio worked properly. The other problem with this one was that this one had a lot of problems. This had been worked on before, and it was by far much poorer condition than this one was to begin with. One of the other problems with this one is this is the one where I think it was this switch. In fact, I can show you. This switch is broken off. This switch is the same as this switch. This is the original switch assembly out of this unit, and replacing one switch is a total pain in the neck. These are all riveted into this metal bracket, and then it's all soldered on the back, which I hope you can see. And trying to change out a single broken switch is quite a chore. It was much easier to, again, rob this assembly out of our donor unit over there and just switch it out. So I switched that out also into this one. And then finally, the last thing that our donor unit gave up for the cause was the faceplate. So this unit, here's the original faceplate that came off this unit. And as you can see, maybe, here you can see the top edge. You have this nice mitered angle right here, and it goes down and tapers down towards the wall and so forth, and it's all very nice and neat and organized. And when you put it against the wall, this sits flat against the wall and looks very nice. But on this particular one, the bottom, which is a little hard to see if we can do it, the bottom is all rolled up into the back like this. So I'm not sure why or how that happened. It's pretty uniform all the way across. As you can see, maybe if I hold it this way, there is no sharp edge. Like here's a sharp edge and here's the corner, but here it's all rolled underneath. So I don't know whether this was some type of shipping damage, or this is the way we received it, or some kind of damage that happened in the future, or maybe this was installed in a house in the backsplash between kitchen cabinets and they got it too close to the backsplash on the kitchen counter, and in those days they probably would be zebra ash cabinets with Formica countertops, you know, that oatmeal color with the little gold flecks in it. Anyway, maybe it was too close to that, and the original installer or someone very carefully bent this over to make it smaller so it would fit on the wall properly. It's a guess, but it sounds reasonable to me. This is far too damaged to do anything with. There isn't any way that I'm going to be able to bend this all back and make it look original like the top does. As you can see here, this area is very flat. And as you can see, that this is the same area on the bottom. It's now all rolled over. And it would have been just too difficult to do. So our donor unit gave up its faceplate for this unit. Now, the donor unit, the faceplate was not bad. there was a little bit of bending up here in the top, and I straightened it out the best I could without going crazy on the whole thing. One of the problems with these is this whole faceplate is made out of aluminum, and it's not terribly thick. It's not super thin. We're not talking Pepsi can thin here, but it's certainly not super heavy. When they get bent, because it's aluminum, it tends to stretch the aluminum. So when you try to bend it back, it makes it really very difficult to get it back exactly as it was. So you have to kind of know how to do this a little bit, and then also you have to know when to stop. And I stopped on this one because I thought that looked good. The bottom corners and this corner look very nice. The anodizing still looks pretty good. There's a little scrape down here, and there's a lot of knob marks behind the knobs, but you don't see it, so no harm, no foul. The other thing on this one is I don't think these are original knobs, or maybe they are original knobs from the early days, because these have the chrome or silver inserts around the black, as compared to this one, which have gold. Once I got all that done, then it was time to put it all back together. So I mounted the face, I put the grill work back in place with the little push keepers that you saw me take out in part 1. I cleaned up the face plates. I very carefully removed as much paint on the edges and things on them as I could. You have to be really careful, because the finish on these, this is an anodized finish. Anodizing is a coating, and if you scratch it, if you scuff it, if you scrub it and wear it down, there's no reasonable way to fix it. You have to be very careful. Almost all sets like this, to some degree, have paint on the edge. When people paint their kitchens, they don't take them off the wall, they just paint around them. One of the problems is because of when these were made, you know, back in the 50s and 60s and even through the 70s to a large extent, kitchens were always painted with oil-based enamel. And oil-based enamel gets on the faceplates, and it's really hard to get off. So you have to be really careful. I clean them with some of that orange citrus cleaner, and I use a blue Scotch-Brite pad, and that works really well. It won't scratch the aluminum, but you do have to be careful that you don't rub the anodization off. So this was cleaned and then all put back together. This one was cleaned and all put back together. This one had a little bit of bending on this corner down here, which I straightened out and turned out very well. The other thing that's interesting about these and having them side by side is the finish on this one is actually somewhat different than the finish on this one. This is a more of a matte finish, and this is more of a, I don't know what to call it exactly. This has more of a metallic look to it. So they obviously changed the way the units were finished at some point. Maybe this was more modern or more jazzy or whatever. So I put them all back together, and I also cleaned and made sure that the auxiliary input jacks here and here both work. These are your pretty standard RCA jacks, and they are designed for a phonograph. And I always found it amusing that if you look in the early NuTone catalogs, there's illustrations, no photographs in the catalogs for most products. And there's one illustration where it shows the gal, and she's got a record player on like one of those roll around carts that you had in the 60s, and she's rolling it up to the wall where the master station is so she can plug it in here and listen to her, I don't know, Frank Sinatra records, I guess, something like that. Back in 58, even 1961, they did have a record player by then, but in 1957, 8, 9, and maybe by 1960 they had a record player. They didn't have any auxiliary music devices. You would have to go buy your own and then have a cart and roll it over there. And so I always found it interesting, but it was very forward thinking that they give you this here. As for how these operate, you have a power on-off switch here. When you turn on a set like this, because it does have vacuum tubes, you do have to let it warm up. And warm-up time, usually around 30 seconds is about right till you get any sound out of it at all. And of course, the longer you leave it on, the temperature and the circuitry stabilizes in the temperature that's inside the wall, and that actually makes it work better. You have a tone control here, which is treble to bass. Bass is overreaching perhaps just a little bit. There is less, so it's more like treble and less treble. How about that? This would be, it's power on and volume. This would be what I would call system volume. It's the level for throughout the entire house as compared to this, which is the master speaker volume, which is the speaker that's built in here. And then it has this area here where it says intercom range. So if you have it in that range, the intercom works better. You have your tuning dial here, your input selector, which is AM or FM. However, on this knob here, which is mostly your intercom, but it's also audio input selector. If you move it here, it's in the phono position, so your input is the jack. If you move it here, it's radio. If you move it here, now you're in room-to-room intercom. And then this is a spring-loaded switch, so if you want to call to someone, you can flip it over to talk and yell at the kids, and then you release it and it pops back to listen, and then you can hear, "Mom, we're not doing anything." And then room to room would be no music, the system's on, no music is playing, and so the intercom is available. The intercom functions on these systems is very, very basic. So I have it hooked up to a model 2027 speaker. This would be appropriate for this one. This is a little later for this one. This would have had a 2024 or a 2025. Same design, smaller metal grill, but it doesn't make any difference. So if we turn this up, and we're going to put it on room to room, so the intercom will work. If we push this, you can hear it come out the master. Now, there is no listen button on the remote, so then the person in the other room, they have to move their switch to talk. That's better. And then it goes back to listen. So the listen mode also would be like putting a station on monitor, letting you listen in to what's going on throughout the house. So it's very rudimentary. If you have the radio playing and you activate the intercom, it plays over the sound of the radio. It doesn't mute the radio in any way. So these systems really are built-in music systems with a little bit of intercom. That's the way I always look at them. And then up here at the top, you have your room control switches. There are 3 position switches like that. So bottom is radio intercom. Center is off. And upper position is listen in to a remote, like that. So it has a lot of features for its day, and these turned out actually really well. As exciting as sets like this are to work on, I'm kind of tired of working on these two. This has been going on now for about 3 weeks. There's been 3 parts orders for them because things come up as you go along. Since you have systems that don't work at all when you receive them, you have to do a certain amount of work. There's a certain amount you know you're going to need, which you can order, and then you do work on them to get them to the point where you can actually turn them on for the first time and then see what you really get, and then there may be another parts order and maybe another parts order also. And certainly in this case, having our donor unit over there came in really handy, so we could return 2 working sets that are in very nice cosmetic condition for their age. They're certainly not like the day they were made, and they may not be 100-point models in a intercom concourse, but all in all, not bad for 1958 and 1961. So these sets are repairable. However, parts like these 2 coils, oops, these 2, okay, these don't exist just to buy anymore. They just don't exist. Nobody makes parts like this much anymore. And also, it isn't like this coil. This isn't some sort of universal coil that some company made that everybody in the world that made a radio used. There's lots and lots and lots and lots of different kinds of these. So you have to have the right one, and if you can't find the right one, that makes repairing your radio tricky or sometimes impossible. So it depends on what condition it is. One of the downsides to sets like this is because of their age, you don't know how many times they've been worked on before and who's done what to them. I have another one here that belongs to me, and and I'm going to do a video about that, and it's got some pretty horrendous repair work done to it. It's just You know, I don't know if it works or not because I've never turned it on or tried it, but it's got some pretty awful repair work done to it, and I don't know. So can be fixed, but sometimes they can be difficult. I hope you found this interesting, and perhaps for someone it will be helpful. If it is, give it a thumbs up on YouTube because that helps us just a little bit. There'll be a banner right here that shows you how to subscribe. Go to our YouTube homepage, click on the bell, and when you click on the bell, click on it to receive all notifications. And every time we post a new video, you'll get a notification and you can watch it. That's all for today. See you on the next video.